So I'm thinking that tonight you're going to find that it's a little easier to follow what's going on than it has been in a couple of other sessions. And for some of you, it's going to be a review, partly from years ago. So it may be more than a review, I'm not sure. We're talking tonight in more detail about structures of consciousness, which we had just opened up towards the end of last class. So why are structures of consciousness so much more difficult to detect than states of consciousness? Why can't they be found in any of the world's meditative systems? Well, the reason is that the great spiritual systems are, with the exception of the Baha'i faith, at least 1,000 years old. Why then is it important for the religions to include structures in their self-conceptions? Because structures determine how we experience and interpret our world. They have a direct role to play in how we interpret our spiritual experiences, no matter which rung of the ladder of structural development we happen to be standing on. Wilber compares the hiddenness of structures with the invisibility of the rules of grammar. Think about it for a minute. People all over the world learn to speak the language of their environment without ever having to learn the rules of how to construct sentences. Let's go backwards tonight and start with Merrill. I'll bring that up right now. Where is my share screen? Okay, so number one, please.
Okay, I'm waiting for it to, oh, there it is. Okay. The Aqua Model?
Uh-oh,
How do you say it? Aqua?
just a minute, something's wrong.
Oh,
What have I done wrong here? I've got the wrong set of readings.
right, because the one you sent us.
Sorry, I've opened the wrong one. So somehow or other, I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to go away and find it. Just a second.
Okay, we'll chat.
Yeah. What the heck happened?
Yeah, because what you sent us, Matt, is not what you just put up.
Right.
Isn't it class 10, Mark?
I beg your pardon?
Isn't it class 10?
Yes.
Yes.
That's what
but
I got in the mail. I got in the mail and I printed it. It matched what you put on the screen.
So
No, he had a different reading number 1. It still had the same title, class 10, but reading number 1 was a different reading.
Mine says the Aqua model has already been used to create an integral. It's a different.
But mine didn't say that. It says every
Also,
person growing up in a particular language.
I don't know
Mine,
how you sent out different ones then, Mark.
mine is the same you.
Is mine?
Yes, yes, yes.
So the one you had up, Mark, is the one I have.
just hang on. That was not the correct one. So just
Oh.
Here's what
hang
I
on a
thought.
second here.
Yeah.
Okay, so I got the wrong one.
See if I can do this on the fly here.
Well, when you sent it to me in Word, it's the right one.
Oh,
That's weird.
Because I had the other one.
Okay, so that I have to shut that one down. Sorry, just. Oh, that's weird. What is going on?
Can we just read from the printed one, Mark?
Sorry, I've just about got it. I need to just have 5 seconds of silence so I
Okay,
can
sorry.
figure out what I'm doing. This is not simple.
Sorry.
Oh, for crying out
I'm going to mute you.
Mark, if it helps, the Word document that you sent me was the correct one.
Okay, folks, I think I've got it. Does this, every person growing up is appearing on your screen?
It's not on the screen yet.
You're not screen sharing yet, sweetie.
Oh, I am. Okay, sorry.
You've got it, but you're not sharing it.
Yeah, sorry. Hey,
That's it.
oh my goodness. That comes from changing your mind about the names of some of the classes that I've been working on recently. So what you saw was an earlier version. I don't know how I missed, because I have two versions of everything. I have the Word document that I sent Meryl, and then I have PDFs that I've made of those. And I forgot to make a PDF of the new version of this. Anyway, so that gives you an idea of the complexity behind the scenes that you're all oblivious to. So in my own defense, sorry. I should have checked that. All right, so now we're back to Meryl. Thank you very much, Meryl, for your patience.
It's okay. Every person growing up in a particular language speaking culture, say an English speaking one, will grow up speaking that language quite correctly for the most part. They will use subjects and verbs correctly. They will use adverbs and adjectives correctly. And on balance, will put all the words together correctly following the English rules of grammar. But if you ask any one of them to write down those rules of grammar, virtually none of them can do it. They are all following these rules perfectly, but nobody knows what the rules are.
And if you've been a teacher, you'll attest to this fact that people don't know what the rules are. They have no concept of it. So structures of consciousness are like that too. Each of the 6 to 8 major levels of development has a structure, which is a pattern governed by hidden rules like grammar. When people are at that structure stage of development, they will almost perfectly follow the rules of that level, but will have no idea that they're doing so. Moreover, they can't see these rules by looking within or introspecting. All they would see are various words, symbols, signs, and concepts, but not the hidden grammar rules governing them. In order to discover the rules of English grammar, you would have to study numerous English-speaking people, examine how they speak, and laboriously deduce the rules they are following. This is why, although first-person states of consciousness, which are immediately available through introspection, were discovered at least 50,000 years ago, third-person structures weren't discovered until 1 century ago. That's why none of the world's meditation systems includes knowledge of these 6 to 8 stages of normal development. Yes, they have many maps containing the stages of meditation, but none of them contain the stages of the structures of growth. So Wilber captures the differences between structures and states with a simple contrasting pair of terms. And I don't think Eva's online. Am I right, Linda? I didn't see her earlier.
Not on tonight.
Okay, but maybe you could read, Linda, number 2.
Okay, reading number 2. So we're calling these structure stages the stages of growing up, since they occur to all human beings as they grow and develop into mature human beings. We're calling the state stages of meditative development leading to awakening or enlightenment the stages of waking up, because these are the fairly rare meditative stages leading to an experience of what is said to be ultimate reality, ultimate truth, a great liberation, a supreme identity of the self with this ultimate reality.
Okay, thank you. Very clear. So I want to have you take a look at this chart here. So The left-hand side of this is, I hope, familiar to you. I think I've shown this to you before. The levels of consciousness, and called by all sorts of different names within the spectrum of light. Now, what we've done in this particular case is put Jean Gebser's worldviews beside the appropriate places in that list. So you can see that it starts with archaic, which is really hardly a level of consciousness at all. And then the magic one, where you're a young child, usually in, let's say, 1 to 5 or something like that. And then mythic. Then eventually, if you're lucky, you develop a rational level of consciousness or worldview. And what we're struggling with right now on the planet is to embrace a pluralistic worldview. And Wilbur is really pushing us to develop into an integral view. So this chart illustrates the alignment of Ken Wilber's spectrum of consciousness with the 6 worldviews first discovered by the Swiss philosopher and linguist Jean Gebser. And I think I have, yes, I do. I have a portrait of Jean Gebser. This set of worldviews was first put out in his 1953 masterpiece, The Ever-Present Origin. This book is a culmination of several decades of thought and research. It is a brilliant example of high-quality European scholarship, bringing together dozens of original insights in linguistics, anthropology, mythology, art, philosophy, and science. As one scholar put it, the ever-present origin shows that scholarly precision and faithfulness to given data are fully compatible with a broad, imaginative, and spiritual outlook. And it exposes the utter sterility of the prevailing positivistic, mechanistic, and wrongly scientific methods. So we should mention that Wilber's idea of using the spectrum of light to depict the structures of consciousness was first suggested to him by spiral dynamics. Well, and I've given you a multi-page document here, which is actually a PowerPoint. I hope you've had a chance to look at this in some detail. If you have the PowerPoint version, this spiral is actually spinning, but not in this version. Now, I don't know if I can, oh, I can go down, okay. So the person who really is credited with this view of the world is Clare Graves, who was an American. Let's see. So spiral dynamics is a model of the evolutionary development of individuals, organizations, and societies. So its cyclical theory is based on the innovative research of the American psychologist Clare Graves. Now, in 1986, Don Beck and Christopher Cowan published a book called Spiral Dynamics. And then Don Beck and Ken Wilber later collaborated to produce a hybrid of their two systems called Spiral Dynamics Integral. Well, that's Don Beck. I actually had a chance to meet him. He was here in Ottawa for one day many years ago. So this page along by itself is quite useful. And I know Harold's already had a chance to synthesize some of this into his critique of Wilber, which he just sent me 5 minutes before this session today. So I haven't had a chance to take a look at what he's had to say, but I will in tomorrow probably. Anyway, this is a very useful way of looking at the world and its developments. These are structures of consciousness here, the multicolored ones. Let's just see. Now this fellow, Caleb Rosado from Texas, he's an associate dean of arts and sciences at Odessa College in Odessa, Texas. He's pinpointed three main components of religion. These are religion itself, spirituality, and worship. And so these are extracts from an article that he'd written. So according to Rosado, religion is the organized expression of faith and the sacred. It is communal, particular, and defined by boundaries. Spirituality is a state of interconnectedness with the others. It is private, universal, and has no boundaries. And finally, worship is the manner of behavior in the presence of the sacred. It is either communal or private, depending on the mimetic or structural level at which it is expressed.
Mark, there's a capital O on other. I'm assuming that's a reference to God.
Yeah, I would think so. So the rest of the slides in this are a detailed breakdown of what Rosado would have to say about each of the colors that we saw in that earlier screen. So I'm not going to go through this. It's quite detailed, but I think if you spend a little time with it, you'll get a sense of how these three subsets of religion have developed over time. So that's the red, which is magic. Now this, earlier on in classes that we did in about 20 years ago, Wilbur was referring to this level as blue, but now they've renamed it as amber. But the main points of people at this stage are very clear. Look at this. Rigidity, guilt, and dogmatism are high in structural religion. They're very hierarchical, structure-wise, rule-bound. Anyway, let's just keep going. Whoops. I'm stuck now. How can I? Whoops. Okay, so there we are. Orange is where a lot of people are stuck at the moment. This relates a lot to the New Age perspective on life. Spirituality is feels good, tell me more about me, gushy, emotional, experiential, and multiplistic. Whoops, this is now green is something that a good part of North America and Europe are sort of submerged in at the moment. So self-help, egalitarian, communitarian. Unfortunately, they're intolerant. The rigidity is high, dogmatism is low. They don't know what they believe, but they're certain about it. Inner-oriented spirituality, focused on internal peace, harmony, and togetherness. Trying to be interconnected with natural forces. Why does that do that? Okay. The next level beyond green is yellow. This is sort of the beginning of the integral realms, if you like.
Yellow?
Yellow, yeah. So religion is integrative, flexible, inclusive, tolerant, functional, and contextual, with a flattened organizational pyramid. Spirituality is inner-directed, can be mystical, is low on dogma, high in expressiveness. And worship is functional and individualistic. What works best for me? And then turquoise, which is really straight ahead, integral. So that's sort of the goal for Wilbur at this point. He feels that humanity is ready to enter this in a major way. So religion is a living, wisdom-oriented, order-seeking system of interdependent relationships that transcend the usual human barriers to create global community in harmony with all life forms in a single ecosystem. Now, this sets up resonances for me with the Baha'i faith in certain ways. Spirituality is holistic in nature and mystical, encompassing 4 dimensions: the vertical to God, the inward to self, the horizontal to humankind, and the outward to nature. It stands in awe of the cosmic order with a macro view of how all life interconnects with the divine, with a sense of order, purpose, and wisdom. And worship is mystical and transcendental, a holistic union of body, mind, soul, and spirit with the divine.
And Mark, guess what color Baha'u'llah's ring was?
Yeah,
Turquoise.
there you go. Who thought of it first?
Hmm.
Anyway, so in recent publications, Wilbur refers to the colors in the spectrum as different altitudes. So thus in slides 8 to 14 of the Spiral Dynamics PowerPoint, each altitude is associated with its own color on the spectrum, which we've seen. Now, sorry, I'm just trying to stay on track here. So I want to talk about varieties of religious teachings for a minute. It's crucial to understand the following structures because in virtually every culture on the planet, there are today a large number of people at each and every one of these stages. And they all see, hear, and experience a different version of whatever gospel, dogma, or dharma they are presented with. These different interpretations are quite literally impossible to avoid or escape. Each person engages in a different interpretation at each level of their overall development, no matter where they happen to be. Okay, so let's break out of this and come back to number 3. And Harold, I hope, is ready to read this one for us.
Therefore, spirituality can speak to that person either in the language of their own present level, which they will better understand, or in the language of a fixed level, usually a different level representing the official orthodox stance. If indeed it is different from the level of the person receiving it, they will not fully or clearly understand it. In fact, it can be guaranteed that they will subtly but profoundly misunderstand and distort various quite central issues. Today, every system teaches from basically one preset and predetermined level, usually mythic, occasionally rational, and sometimes rarely pluralistic.
And it's my contention that the manifestations of God are capable of addressing people at all those levels, sometimes with the same speech. They know how they will be interpreted by people at each level. And that's one of the reasons why you'll sense that you always get something new out of the writings as you come back to them a year later or two. You've evolved. The readings or the writings have not changed, but your own altitude has changed. Instead of this one-size-fits-all approach, Wilbur believes that any conscientious spirituality will put its finest minds to work in creating the most understandable, approachable, and correct spiritual teaching for each and every structure and state available. The same basic gospel, dharma, or teaching, but interpreted from each of the major developmental levels or views. Each religion would thus have a magic teaching, a mythic traditional teaching, a rational modern teaching, a pluralistic postmodern teaching, a holistic integral teaching, and a super integral teaching, and possibly more in the future. I've mentioned this fellow several times, Dustin DePerna. He's probably Wilbur's most illustrious student. He's really struck off on his own in a major way. So I'm going to rely on his characterizations of the 5 major structures of consciousness for a little while here. So let's go through them one at a time. Magic, which is an egocentric approach to life, is associated with the red one on the spectrum. An individual at this altitude leans towards the literal interpretation of sacred texts, regularly focusing on 1 or 2 verses of scripture in particular. He or she tends to be overly concerned with power and is frequently distracted by the supernatural elements of faith. Magic individuals value rites and rituals and may be extremely superstitious. Why don't I bring up this? Yeah, let's do this here. So the red level seeks to avoid existential punishment and to gain eternal reward. Many of them act without much consideration for others. Fearful of wrathful deities or a single god often keep people at this stage in line. I don't know if you can think back to a time when you had these points of view, but you must have when you were very young. But the fact that you're in this environment tonight suggests to me that you've moved on quite a bit. So let's see what the next level is, this amber mythic level. It has the absolutist flavor of the amber altitude. At this stage, an individual's ultimate concern begins to shift away from self-gratification and ego-centered drives towards an emphasis on their role and identity within society. They may still maintain a rather literal interpretation of scriptures. Mythic individuals often develop a desire for a personal relationship with God. In Islam, this period allows a deepening of one's submission to Allah. Amber level Christians feel a drive for true companionship with Jesus. Hindus may be drawn more toward bhakti yoga, a practice involving love and devotion to God. In each case, one's personal faith or set of beliefs provide deep meaning and courage for living. Mythic individuals tend to focus on absolute truth and may have a puritanical sense of right and wrong. They may prefer a hierarchical structure and order, even if that structure is oppressive or abuses its power. They are usually willing to control their impulses in exchange for deferred fulfillment, often in the next world. The approval of his or her group is of the utmost importance. They're often kept in line through feelings of guilt. In many cases, the individual's own identity extends to that of his or her own group, family, or religious community. Their sense of right and wrong normally come from an external authority, such as one's group, society, church, Quran, Vedas, Dharma, or duty. Those outside the group are seen as wrong, unreligious, or out of alignment with the one straight path. A huge percentage of the world's population is at this level at the moment. This is where fundamentalism really lives. So we need to know it, and we need to know how to get people to grow beyond it, because many people remain there all their lives. Okay, so we're back up here. We're looking at rational, which is the orange level. Rational has the inquisitive flavor of the orange altitude. Individuals at this level of development begin to question and examine all their existing beliefs. They begin to scrutinize the myths they believed without hesitation at the previous stage in order to find deeper meanings. For the first time, they recognize the ability to have their own opinions outside the restrictions allowed by the group or scripture. As a result, rational individuals may become agnostic or atheistic, both of which Wilber understands to be healthy expressions of religious orientation at this stage of development. Sometimes, due to an extremely atheistic orientation, they may try to rid the world of all lower levels of religious expression, declaring them immature or even childish. And we saw a great example of this about 10 years ago with certain scientists who decided, well, thinkers who decided that religion was childish and should be dispensed with. The individual at this stage is likely to place a strong emphasis on autonomy, independence, and success. They are usually emphatic about embracing the value of the scientific method, evidence, and tried and true experience. By reflecting on their own thoughts and beliefs, they start to move beyond blind belief in particular religious ideologies to a position where they can operate on them consciously and critically. So they step back objectively from them and start to critique them. Okay, so we're going to switch back now. I'm hoping Jennifer could come and read number 4 for us.
An orange level of religious orientation is usually marked by the fact that the person's sphere of care and compassion expands to embrace the entire world. This world-centric awareness produces a deep notion of universal tolerance. As one scholar points out, tolerance begins when we no longer see a group as other, but as a concrete human community with real and ancient values. This cognitive leap is a difficult one, especially when the cultural other happens to be a religious other. It is at this stage that rather than identifying with others because of race, culture, or a belief system, the individual begins to see the underlying common connection that we all have as human beings. With this understanding comes the birth of and care for universal human rights.
Nicely done. Okay, so that was orange. Now we're going to switch to green. We're moving up to pluralistic as a worldview. This is characterized by sensitivity. The individual at this stage begins to realize that life's issues don't have to be black and white. They become comfortable with shades of gray and may even enjoy paradox. As DePerna says, pluralistic individuals recognize the deep truth that all traditions are simply different perspectives on the one ultimate reality. This religious pluralism goes beyond the tolerance expressed in the rational stage to a full embrace of other religious traditions. Individuals recognize the cultural embeddedness of their own religious beliefs. Consequently, they search out other spiritual systems, not with a desire to convert those of other faiths, but in order to take other perspectives, to find out how another's view may be able to supplement their own. They begin to ask questions such as, what areas of knowledge are missing in my own religious system? Do I have any blind spots? For the first time in development, religious experience is cross-referenced with those experiences described in other world traditions in a serious fashion that actually gives value to the experience of the other. The pluralistic person begins to see that the deep structures of those experiences are similar, despite the fact that surface features might appear quite different. Those at the green altitude will show actions and behaviors that demonstrate a deep value for connection with other people. They find great significance not only in community, but in the unity and equality of all people. Sound familiar? They believe that everyone should have the opportunity to speak and be heard. No decisions should be made until all have come to some form of consensus. This feeling of interconnectedness often results in social activism in the world. Harvard professor Paul D. Hansen calls this the hermeneutic of engagement. Although it is present at times at lower levels of development, this becomes a necessity at a pluralistic level and beyond. Because of their nuanced sensitivity to culture, time, identity, and place, pluralistic individuals tend to despise the broad universals and hierarchies they often embraced in their earlier mythic and rational stages. That's why they're so strongly anti-hierarchical. They disparage them for their dominating and repressive natures. They believe that it isn't right to value one level more than another. This belief leads to a confusion between dominating and healthy hierarchies. In fact, they would prefer to abandon hierarchies altogether. So now we're ready to talk about the integral level, which is between, well, it's turquoise and teal really both together. So this is characterized by its comprehensiveness. Having taken the perspectives of other religious traditions, supplemented one's beliefs, and uprooted one's own worldview from the limiting perspectives of his or her own culture to whatever degree is possible, the individual at the turquoise altitude begins to find a vast and sophisticated mental resting place. Integral religious adherents have found a center within themselves concerning their own religious beliefs. The search to find individual truths starts to settle down as they learn how to rest in and as truth itself. Here, God or ultimate reality is seen as both immanent and transcendent, as self and other. God is recognized from first, second, and third points of view. God or Godhead is seen at least partly as the causal ground from which all form and knowledge originally arise. One of the most unique features of the integral stage is that it recognizes the importance and values of all the preceding levels. For example, someone at the integral level understands that the green altitude served as a filter to neutralize all dominating tendencies. Having gone through the pluralistic level ensures that oppressive tendencies do not resurface when healthy natural hierarchy returns at the integral level. So the greens think they can get rid of hierarchy, but in fact, they're just cleansing it. The preceding levels are understood as vital foundational elements that support the higher stages. Without the lower levels of development, integral levels would not be possible. Therefore, the lower levels should be embraced in agape, as they call it in Christianity. Nurtured, and each level be made as healthy as possible. Doing so will enable the integral thinkers of tomorrow to flourish. So with a clearer picture of the universe, the individual at this level of religious orientation will likely begin to demand more integrative, open systems and forms of decision-making by consent rather than majority rule or the time-consuming process of consensus. Religious adherents at this stage will likely agree to employ decisions quickly upon suggestion, unless there are substantial objections. Decisions can be implemented at an astonishing speed because individuals are aware that course corrections can be made along the way. Which reminds me of the Baha'i principle of going along with the majority in an LSA, for instance, on a decision that you really are not happy with, but you're going to go along just for unanimity's sake. And what are you doing? You're hoping that circumstances will reveal whether or not this is a good idea or not, and course corrections can be made at that time. Very similar. At the turquoise altitude, individuals recognize the importance of both equality and value distinctions. They have a deep desire to make sense of the world, to order it, and to organize the fields of knowledge that previously seemed disconnected. And you can see Wilbur doing that with his 4 quadrants, where he's talking about the different fields of knowledge appropriate to each of those quadrants. The individual is thirsty for knowledge and the experience of other religions, not only to supplement their own understanding, as they did at the pluralistic stage, but now to organize and help draw clear maps for other travelers to follow. Spirituality is no longer an object to be studied, but is entirely embedded in every moment, making it impossible to avoid. There is a spaciousness that allows turquoise individuals to glide effortlessly between multiple perspectives and states of consciousness. Maybe David Oak could be prevailed upon to read number 5 for us.
Oh, I'll be very happy to do that. Here we go. To quote Suzanne Cook Gruter, though individuals at the unitive stage are aware of themselves as separate and unique embodiments, they also identify with all other living beings. The experience of an individual's I amness is recognized and felt as the same I amness that exists within every other living creature. An I amness that smiles softly back in bliss every time it is recognized and acknowledged. That's Gustin de Perna.
Yep. That reminds me instantly of Namaste. I recognize the divine in you. So, the reason for reviewing these 5 stages in such detail is that we humans see, experience, and understand God or spirit or ultimate reality differently, and each of these major rungs of the ladder of spiritual intelligence. The changes are so striking that we may even say that we worship a different God or spirit or ultimate reality at each structural level. Each version of God is perfectly adequate for the stage and capacities of the human beings living on the rung of the ladder at which it emerges. Putting them all together gives us a spectrum of different gods. It also enables us to appreciate the limited but evolving nature of our understanding of God, and hopefully to be more empathetic towards those who worship a different conception of God. In Wilbur's eyes, a fully mature spirituality is one that is experienced not in childish or adolescent ways or views, but in a profoundly grown-up fashion or view, one that has significantly matured into the wiser, more perspective-containing, more inclusive and tolerant and integral structures that have recently emerged and been discovered by humanity. So lest anyone think these structures of consciousness are simply ivory tower concepts with little practical application, Wilbur offers us the example of the famous culture wars, which he sees as a zealously overheated argument as to which system of values is the one true system. So a culture war is a conflict or struggle for dominance between groups within a society or between societies. arising from their differing views, practices, and beliefs. So there are generally agreed to be three major contestants in these culture wars. The traditional, often fundamentalistic, mythic, literal, religious believers who are advocates of God's truth as literally revealed in the Bible. Then there's the modern, rational, scientific believers who are advocates of progress and achievement. And thirdly, there's the postmodern, multicultural sensitivity believers, advocates of non-marginalizing attitudes and ecological sustainability. So which colors are those? Let's go back here. The mythic is the amber, the rational is the orange, and the pluralistic is the green. These three value groups reside not only in the United States, but around the world, and in some cases are behind the breakout of actual warfare. Although Wilbur believes that this also often involves even lower levels, such as magic mythic power drives. The important point here is that these three value groups correspond almost exactly with three of the major structure stages of human development that we've just described. The traditional religious fundamentalists are at mythic literal. Oh, sorry, I went too far. Mythic literal, the amber level. The modern scientists are at the formal rational level, or orange. And the postmodern multiculturalists are at postmodern or post-formal pluralistic, right here. So these three are the contenders. All three of these structure stages are referred to as first tier stages, TIER, because all first tier stages believe that their truth and values are the only truth and values that are real. All the others are infantile, misguided, loopy, or just plain wrong. Hence the culture wars. And if these three groups are not engaged in actual warfare somewhere on the planet, they can definitely be found on TV and radio programs and in many editorial sections of every major newspaper, not to mention the many books they author, arguing vociferously as to why they are right and the others are totally wrong. Now that brings us to number 6. How about Hangame? Could you read this one for us?
Sure. The rational scientists and new atheists believe the sensitive, caring, postmodern pluralists are loopy and woo-woo, and that the traditional religious fundamentalists are archaic, childish, and dangerous. The postmodern pluralists think that both the rational scientists and the traditional fundamentalists are caught up in socially constructed modes of knowing, which are culturally relative and have no more binding power than poetry or fashion styles. This knowledge gives the pluralist an enormous sense of superiority, although in their worldview, nothing is supposed to be superior. And the traditional fundamentalists think that both the modern rational scientists and the postmodern pluralists are all unbelieving heathens, bound for an everlasting hell. So who cares what they think anyway?
Yeah, just a little humor. Oh boy, thank you. So the study of any major developmental model will show the origin and relation of all three of these groups to be three stages in the overall growth and development of all human beings. As such, all of them are appropriate for a particular period of growth, but inadequate by themselves at higher stages. These three latest levels of human evolution to emerge, aside from the just beginning, very recent integral level, are fighting for supremacy amongst themselves. They're fighting for the control of education, politics, civil values, religion and spirituality, parental practices, life values, and the list goes on. This is why the emergence of comprehensive integral values is such a revolutionary development. Radically new in all of history, in fact. Integral stages go one step further and ask, what partial truths do each of these first-tier truths have to contribute to a fuller view of humanity? Then Integral goes on to create integrating frameworks such as Aqua to put all of those frameworks together to more accurately reflect the whole of reality and all of its various interpretations. Okay, I think it's Zilda's turn to read number 7.
Okay. The result is often called a second-tier approach, and it is indeed a radically novel evolutionary emergent that promises to transmute every one of those areas just mentioned, plus many, many more. This is behind the massive excitement and wild optimism about a worldwide global transformation to a truly unified worldview. But we must remember that there is not just one transformation from the old paradigm to the new paradigm, but there are and have been at least 6 to 8 major transformations in history. And only the very latest one, the emergence of Integral, which involves at this time only about 5% of the population, is the huge game changer that the global transformationists present it to be. But it has indeed begun and is indeed a game changer. Using more sophisticated maps, such as Integral, gives us a much better picture of the actual steps that are involved and what we can do to accelerate this revolutionary transformation.
Beautifully read, thank you. So I'd like to sum up this presentation of the structures of consciousness on a lighter note. In the fictionalized world of the 1960s TV series Star Trek, Captain Kirk and all other Starfleet commanders were required to follow a strict guiding principle when contacting a civilization that was not as advanced as their own. The Prime Directive, also known as Starfleet General Order No. 1, was first defined in the March 1968 episode called Bread and Circuses. It stated that there must be, quote, no identification of self or mission, no interference with the social development of said planet, no references to space or the fact that there are other worlds or civilizations, unquote. So being a playful sort, Wilbur borrowed this idea to devise his own prime directive. In his case, the goal of the Integral movement is to protect the health of the overall spiral of human development. Okay, Jack, you get to read this wonderful statement of number 8.
Okay, let me unmute here. Each level of consciousness and wave of existence is, in its healthy form, an absolutely necessary and desirable element of the overall spiral, of the overall spectrum of consciousness. Even if every society on Earth were established fully at the turquoise meme level, every infant born in that society nonetheless starts at level 1 at beige, at sensory motor instincts and perceptions, and must then grow and evolve through purple magic, red and blue myth, orange rationalism, green networking, and into yellow and turquoise vision logic. All of those waves have important tasks and functions. All of them are taken up and included in subsequent waves. None of them can be bypassed, and none of them can be demeaned without grave consequences to self and society. The health of the entire spiral is the prime directive. You'll have to bump it up, Mark, for me.
Oh, I beg your pardon. Sorry, I'm looking at my paper.
Okay, not preferential treatment for any one level. No question about it. The higher the leading edge and the higher the governing body, the better. But only because second tier consciousness can think of the health of the entire spiral. Ken Wilber, Integral Psychology, Consciousness, Spirit, Psychology, Therapy. Page 232, footnote 22.
Beautiful. So all 4 quadrants showed growth, development, or evolution. In other words, they all show some kind of stages or levels of development. However, Wilber is careful to point out that these are not rigid rungs on a ladder. Instead, they are fluid, flowing waves of unfolding. This development happens everywhere in the natural world. An oak tree unfolds from an acorn through many stages of growth and development. A lion was once a fertilized egg that has grown into the king of the jungle through a number of well-defined stages. The same holds true of humans, as we will see in greater detail next week. Let's look at the last item here. This is sort of just a simple version of the 4 quadrants. So the center is the most gross level, and the development path is out from that center up to the upper left, up to the upper right, etc. So you start in the center with the body in this quadrant, evolve into the mind, and eventually make contact with the spirit. Similarly, in the upper right, which is the exterior of an individual, you're moving from the gross realm to the subtle realm or the dream state to the causal or non-dreaming state. Down in the lower left, you start focusing on me, the egocentric view of life. You move to us, which is ethnocentric, and then all of us, or cosmocentric, as he likes to call it. And lastly, you begin with your group, and then you move to a nation, and finally to the entire globe. So there you have a high-level overview of the integral model, which again is all quadrants, all levels, all lines, all states, and all types. Wilber believes this is the simplest model that can handle all of the truly essential items. Oh, Joey, I think you're going to get to read our last item here. Number 9.
Seem complicated? In a sense, it is. But in another sense, the extraordinary complexity of humans and the relation to the universe can be simplified enormously by touching bases with the quadrants. The fact that every event can be looked at as an I, we, or it, developmental lines or multiple intelligences, all of which move through developmental levels from the body to the mind to the spirit, with states and types at each of those levels. Ken Wilber, The Integral Operating System.
Okay. In short, the integral approach involves the cultivation of body, mind, and spirit in self, culture, and nature. Now, given the size of the religion of tomorrow, I'll just show it to you here. It's 800 pages. As you can imagine, there are many details we've not had time to mention. So just for instance, Spiritual pioneers always explore ahead of their society at each stage. The real differences between dominating and healthy hierarchies. The individual and collective dimensions of the shadow and how these may be cleaned up. The currently widespread stage of consciousness that Wilber calls boomeritis. The disturbing but rather satisfying concept of flatland. And the dysfunctions that may occur at any of the dozen or so transitions between stages of development, along with the therapies best suited to treat each one of them. So that's all I have to say about the structures of consciousness. And before we launch into our discussion, a quick programming note. I've had to postpone next week's class for a week because I'm having a colonoscopy on Thursday and I need to prepare for it. So I won't be in any position on Wednesday night to sit here for 2 hours.
Nope.
You can fill in the details for yourself. So
You can
I'll
s-
just mention that in my email when I respond to everybody, or when I send out the invitation to the next class, which will be on the 22nd? Something like that.
22nd.
Yeah, 22nd.
And how long do the classes go? Is that-
Oh, 2027, I think.
Forever.
No, seriously, folks. Harold had that same question for me the other day, and after a false start, I finally got it right. Where is it? Where did I put it? Okay, here it is. So we have 3 more classes after this. So we'll have one on the 22nd of February. We'll have one on on March 8th, and then the last one on the March 15th date.
So there's none on March 1st then?
No, that's a Baha'i Holy Day.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
Yeah, that's all right.
Okay, so February 22nd,
Yes,
March
March
8th,
8th,
and then is there another one?
March 15th.
Okay, got it.
The Ides of March, I think that is.
Oh, okay.
All right, folks, I see a couple of hands up already. So start thinking about what you want to say. I know Harold's off the mark quickly. What's up?
Oh, yes. You know, I'm somewhere between letting Wilbur be Wilbur and trying to name what I think is missing, you know, from the system.
Mhm.
And then there's another position, sort of giving a Baha'i frame for or theory or model for some of the same territory. Anyway, but I just want to mention about what I see. I was reading Spiral Dynamics today, and I want to read Wilbur's description of the green, or he calls it the sensitive self, people who are against hierarchy, and they look for value communities in which there's dialogue and relationships. And their worldview, he says, is pluralistic relativism. Okay, Mark told us all that. But then he says, where are they seen? Where do you find people that have this worldview? And here's what he says: deep ecology, postmodernism, Netherlands idealism, Rogerian counseling, Canadian healthcare, humanistic psychology, liberation theology, cooperative inquiry, World Council of Churches, Greenpeace, animal rights, ecofeminism, post-colonialism, Foucault, Derrida, that's the deconstructionists, politically correct, diversity movements, human rights issues, eco-psychology. So, you know, it's nice of him to provide those examples, but I think what people do is they take that as those are not photos. Those are moving targets. Those are dynamic communities that have flexibility.
Yep.
and variety. But if you just take it at face value, it looks like there's something wrong with all those groups. And I think people who go into this spiral dynamics think this way. They say, thank God I don't have all the problems that those groups just have. And thank God I'm at a higher level of consciousness. And so I guess what you can't help what people do with a good theory, but some of his examples, I think, invite controversy. It's like, I wouldn't put it that way. He should have wrote a paragraph before listing all those groups and said, but you can find people in there that don't fit with my theory. In other words, the map is not the territory. I got the same problem. You see, I love maps and theories and models myself, but I have to always remember there are existential differences and subtleties, and you have to enter them when you approach them, you have to sort of be in a listening mode, in a dialogical mode. And on the other hand, we cannot do without theories and models. And so, Wilbur provides that in spades. That's it. Well, I want to just give a hint of something I'm going to say on March 15th. I'll come back on March 15th. That's the last class. And I will have been to the Holy Land. And I want to see if one of my theories holds up. I think a Baha'i-inspired theory of the same stuff that Wilbur is talking about would emphasize the spiritual nature of reality and the material nature of reality, and look for unfolding or development in both sides. When you cut up the universe that way, which is closer to the Baha'i revelation, you come up with things like moral and volitional and those kind of developments, which sort of makes you look at it like a parent looks to a child. We're all developing. I'm developing too. God looks down at me and looks at my development. And it would create a sort of a system of humility rather than a kind of elitism, which I'm afraid is hard to avoid in using Wilbur's categories. Anyway, that's it. Sorry to talk so much, but it's very stimulating. Mark's doing a fantastic job. And this model, I hope, is not the last one that is used to understand humanity's development of consciousness.
Well, Wilbur himself indicates that he hopes that this will just be a stepping stone on the way towards a more even more comprehensive, more appropriate model. He can foresee many, many changes. And in fact, there are so many critiques of his work available online. And I have many books here in my library that I could have introduced to show you how people are wrestling with his ideas and trying to break free of some of the constraints that they feel he is bringing to the system. But that would endlessly expand the course itself. And I thought it was important that people hear what he has to say for himself first before they start trying to cope with some of these critiques.
You convinced me we have to let Wilbur be Wilbur. So I'm trying mightily to let him be Wilbur, let Wilbur be Wilbur as well as I can. And there are limits to my ability to do that. I've discovered, sorry.
Well, you're being honest. Thank you. Everybody feels that way, I'm sure. Right? Because he's a different kind of human being than we are. Anyway, okay, Sai, what are you saying?
I just wanted to add on to what Harold was saying with reference to the Baha'i faith or Baha'u'llah. I thought you had said earlier in my first class that I attended that at the end you're kind of going to wrap it up and somehow compare the Baha'i faith to Wilbur down the road.
And not just Wilbur, but the other three sections as well.
Yeah, that's so okay. So what I was going to mention though is recently I took a course and there was a thing on linguistics, and even the linguists don't know why things are in English. And I just want to give you a couple examples. We can say nothing, and we can say something, but we can't say anything. I thought that was cute.
Yeah.
There's no reason for it. And then the other one is when you use a lot of adjectives, a small yellow rusty hunting knife. That order isn't explained anywhere in English, but we all know you got to put them in that order. You can't start with rusty yellow. So I just thought those two would be fun. The other
Nice.
thing I wanted to mention though was last week I was getting confused. Well, I'm still confused, but last week I was mentioning I was confused about the difference between individual consciousness and collective consciousness or society's consciousness. And I wasn't sure which one. Of course, Will was pointing at individual for us to experience it, I guess, and understand it, but then it switches over to be society and so I'm thinking, well, even if that is true, how do we quantify it? Like, do we know how conscious people were 100 years ago compared to now? And so I have a hard enough time describing consciousness for an individual, never mind the society. That's what I'm pointing at. So I think I'll just stay confused on that matter because I'm not sure what pointing at. You know,
Well, and this is, I think, a very fruitful avenue for people to pursue for themselves. You know, to what degree am I influenced by the culture or society around me? That lower left quadrant is active at all times, and we're not even conscious of what it's proposing to us all the time.
yeah, and I like what the reading number 8, when a child is born into the society, it sounds like they take on whatever the collective consciousness is and move up quickly into, so that the baby, by the time it's mature or whatever level, has reached the collective consciousness. Is that what that reading was kind of about?
Yeah, sort of. And maybe I could clarify a little bit. I mean, one of the things that happens in terms of cultural dynamics is that people tend to rise to the level that the majority of the population around them are at, unless they have impairments of some sort. But they're discouraged from going too far beyond that.
Yeah, I understand that, but I also get confused because if you go to India, you feel a very high level of spirituality. And I don't know if that's consciousness, you know?
Yeah,
So,
I'd say it is. Yeah,
okay, so you feel it in the air when you're
for
there.
sure.
So I guess we should be leaning to that, but it's not really I guess it's not what am I trying to say, a capacity. It's a capacity for spirituality, but not necessarily intelligence and things that go with, because India's third world, and yet they're more conscious, you know?
We're going to have more to say about those two that we tend to see as different from each other in the next 3 classes. So hang on to that thought. It's an important one.
Okay. Thank you.
Well, folks, we're finished. We've got 13 minutes left on our clock here. Oh, Joey's going to take some time.
Oh, good. I was just going to say, I want to know what Joey thinks.
I know you said that there's no evidence, but especially from tonight, I can't believe that Wilbur didn't have some study or some connection to the faith. It just, there seems to be so many ideas that resonate. I'm just really finding it difficult that he didn't have any input in his life or his, in his studies from somebody from the faith.
Wasn't somebody in the faith that was with someone was sick with his wife or something, and it was the faith?
Yeah, one of the nurses that Treya had was a Baha'i, and she shared one of the Baha'i prayers for healing with them. And it, I think, actually was referred to in Grace and Grit.
Yeah, it's the prayer that begins, "Thy name is my healing, O my God, and remembrance of thee is my remedy." It was that prayer.
Yeah.
She said for Treya.
So it's quite possible that that's had a lingering effect on him without him necessarily paying much attention to it. Or it's also possible that he's really plugged into the zeitgeist of the current age. that he's picking up things without really understanding the source of the ideas. That's about the best I can do at this point. I mean, he's never commented directly on the Baha'i Faith that I've been aware of, which is a real shame. But I think it would do wonders. But you'll see in the next 3 classes that there's greater evidence than we have already seen of his being very Baha'i-like. Some of them will really knock your socks off. So stay tuned. Oh, Joey, you wanted to respond to that?
Yeah, I suppose it's much like we meet people and they're not a Baha'i in terms of signing their card or whatever. And you say, yes, but you know they're a Baha'i anyway.
Yeah. I tend to feel that way about Wilbur, frankly. All in all but name.
Mhm.
I don't know. I'll have to ask Baha'u'llah about that someday. Okay, Ingrid.
Yeah, just on Joey's point, I mean, for me, it kind of defies, belief that he would not have come across readings and lots more about the Baha'i Faith. I mean, he is so brilliant. He has researched so many things. It's just hard to believe that he would have missed this knowledge system, right? This incredible faith, that fits in with, as some of you were saying, that maybe fits in with, with who he's become. I just find it hard to believe that he didn't credit in any way the Baha'i Faith that he surely must have come across in his readings, rather, not just from one particular individual that happened to be in his life at one point.
Mm-hmm.
So just a comment. I just find that really hard to believe, given his intellectual capacity and his curiosity and everything that we've been hearing about him.
Maybe we should send him a collective email. Okay, what's up with you anyway? Where did you really get these ideas?
Yes. I agree.
Well, you could always ask him, Ken, what do you know about the Baha'i Faith? And he'll answer you.
I actually was thinking of sending him an email.
Go
ahead.
for it.
Go for it, please.
That's a good homework assignment.
Yeah.
You have our full support.
But sometimes my comment would be that sometimes these great minds like Frithjof Schuon, like what's his name, the comparative religionist, Houston Smith, Karen Armstrong, great theologian. Sometimes these people get a stereotype of what the Baha'i Faith is, and they don't really understand it. There's no guarantee that because somebody's brilliant, they're necessarily going to correctly interpret the Baha'i Faith, because the 3 people that I've mentioned, I could tell from Karen Armstrong and what Houston Smith said about the Baha'i Faith, and also Frithjof Schuon, who wrote a book called The Transcendent Unity of Religion. I knew from their what they said about the faith that they didn't get it. So being brilliant is, in fact, I wrote Houston Smith a long letter, and which he was kind enough to acknowledge. And he said that when the religions of man, and I stated my objections to what he said about the Baha'i Faith, before we all go hiking off to Baha'i, which is the latest attempt to create a universal religion or something like that, was kind of a derogatory comment. But for all his brilliance, and he was courteous enough to answer me, and he said, the next edition of my book, I will take your remarks into consideration. But he never did. But he never did when the next edition of the Religions of Mankind, or whatever it's called now, came out. But yeah, I don't know. We could always ask him. Mark, we'll never know unless he tells us. But Mark, you put your finger on something that some people are very close to the zeitgeist, the spirit of the age. Somehow they tap into it.
Yep.
Without necessarily recognizing the source. My problem with Wilbur is, even though you've told us that these ideas have filtered down into society, it's such a complex system that, I have difficulty understanding how this could take the shape of a mass movement. It would have to be simplified somehow, but maybe it's meant for an elite class of intellectuals who philosophize about these things. I don't know, but it's, as Ingrid said, the man he's obviously in the genius category. You synthesized all of this information about not just the world religions, but other things. So that's what I would wonder about, to what extent can all of these wonderful thoughts actually filter down into society and become a significant social force. It seems that philosophy and history has never been capable of doing that. How many disciples of Plato are there today, and Aristotle and Socrates? And how many disciples of Jesus are there around the world? No comparison. So, he definitely counts as one of the enlightened spirits of the age. There's no question about that. But to what extent his ideas will have a broad-based influence, I have my doubts about that.
Okay, stay tuned for class number 12. I'm going to answer that directly.
Oh, are you?
Almost
Okay.
exclusively, that whole talk is about that very subject.
Oh, excellent.
What
Wow.
has been achieved so far and what he expects to have happen based on how things have developed in the past when a new structure of consciousness has been introduced into humanity.
Okay.
It's fascinating stuff. So yeah, stay tuned for that.
I'll be
You'll
tuned.
find it interesting, I think.
Okay, Mark, will you send out to us, please, and give us the dates for your?
I can do that tomorrow, sure.
Okay, great. Thank
Yeah.
you.
No problem. Okay, so is this Belinda or David tonight?
David.
Okay.
First thing, look, Mark, can you send the quotes, as you originally had them? We don't have them all.
We had the incorrect version.
Yeah, the incorrect.
Oh, okay. I'll resend that tomorrow.
Okay, thanks. Now, I wanted to say that I think it's a good thing, that that Wilbur is not a practicing Baha'i. I think that he's done this is very important in itself. I don't know of any Baha'i from a scholar point of view who has ever done anything near what Wilbur has done.
We don't have time.
And and I just think that he's hit upon a system, a structure, or whatever you want to call it, that shows us how much further we have to go in our progression, in our understanding, in our living with one another, including ourselves and so on and so forth. The whole thing. And this makes me feel that, you know, that we ourselves as Baha'is don't understand ourselves, you know, the deeper aspects of the revelation of Baha'u'llah, which then became, you know, the religion of the Baha'i faith. And, you know, and I just wanted to say this because I think it's this whole thing, in many ways, is a revelation to me. And I just feel that, thank God for Wilbur. He's done something that is needed to be done. And I just feel that, well, that's what I wanted to say.
Well, I appreciate that very much, David. I think you're quite right that he's charting out a direction that is consistent with what the faith is doing and gives us some potential markers that we can look at that are not necessarily in Baha'i language, but they're
Validates us.
he's charting a bit of a path for us. Whereas I suspect we all feel a bit hazy about where we're going.
More than more than hazy.
So any light anybody can shed on that potential path, I think is worth considering. We may choose to disregard it, but you know, hey,
I'll be back.
we're all fallible.
Right.
Okay, we're running out of time, but we've got Meryl and then Jack.
So mine's really quick, and it was, I think it's a reword or a similar point that David just made. I thought turning it upside down and seeing Wilbur as in a servant role. He's serving us by doing that deep intellectual complicated stuff that so many of us can't do because we're whatever. I'm saying we in a big general sense, like what everybody's doing. They don't have time for all that. So he's doing a service.
Absolutely right.
Instead of looking at it, oh, he's up there, this intellectual thing, you know, it's like, no, he's a servant to the rest of everybody. Does that make any sense?
It sure does. I really like that idea. I think you really got a hold of something. Yeah. Okay, Jacques.
Jacques agrees with both David and Meryl. I didn't, you know, mean to supply that the faith is be all and end all. And I don't, you know, God works in many mysterious ways in the world. So I'm not going around saying, why didn't Wilbur acknowledge the Baha'i faith or say something about it? Because so many ideas that he's putting out, for those who know the faith well, know that there's a lot of resonances with the Baha'i faith. But we have to understand that, you know, God works in the world not just through Baha'is, he works through the world in many different ways. And so I agree with David that Wilbur is more useful to the world not being a Baha'i than being a Baha'i, I think. And I mean, although it depends how you define Baha'i, I mean, Abdu'l-Baha gave about 3 or 4 different definitions for what a Baha'i is. And in fact, you know, there was one, I think she was a nun, a member of the Christian church in Haifa, she used to run away from Abdu'l-Baha because she was scared of his influence. And he told her one day in a conversation, he said, you don't have to worry that I'm trying to convert you to the Baha'i faith. He said to her, I don't want you to become a Baha'i.
There you go.
He said, I want you to continue to do what you're doing in your church. So, you know, we have to acknowledge that God works in all of these different ways, both within and outside the faith. And who knows, history may Judge Wilbur to be, in retrospect, one of the great lights who announced the coming of the new global consciousness. I mean, who knows? And I like what Meryl said about him being a servant. That's a good thing if he considers himself to be a servant. But I do like the concept. So the jury is still out, my friends.
Well, it's interesting as you're saying, you know, it's working through Wilbur, but it's another point that I've been raising throughout the course, and I hope it sticks with everybody, is that God continues to work through all the other religions.
Oh yeah, for sure.
I think we tend to think, oh no, he's removed all the power from those religions and it's just focused now in the Baha'i faith. I don't really buy that. I think they're all living entities that are capable of evolving beyond where they are at the moment. And it's important for us to have a really close relationship with each of them to be able to realize what their hurdles are, and also pick up on the fantastic things that they've offered humanity over the centuries. Now we have to have a love relationship with them, a non-judgmental, loving relationship with all the religions. That's what we're called to. I love the fact that Abdu'l-Baha said that to this lady. I think that's wonderful.
You know what I'm wondering? I asked about what Joey thinks. Now I'm wondering what Alan thinks.
Well, then there's also Bill and Margaret and Hangame and Zilda and Linda and Jennifer. Oh, I missed Danielle. I beg your pardon. So you're all having your own thoughts.
And what's amazing about Ingrid in her development is that once upon a time she was a fundamentalist Christian and now she's a Baha'i.
No.
Yes.
Really?
And I can't imagine Ingrid as being a fundamentalist Christian at all. She's so broad-minded and tolerant and liberal.
Wow, I had no idea.
Absolutely. A friend of mine was just in Santa Marta, Colombia, and I was there in 1973, and it's where I became baptized in the Caribbean, formally into being a fundamentalist Christian.
Oh, well.
How about that, Mark?
Huh. That's amazing. I had no idea.
There's a story there. There's a big story that we don't have time to hear tonight, but I'd like to know that evolution that Ingrid went through.
So I guess, Ingrid, that means that some of the things I was talking about, the structures, kind of resonated for you.
Oh, no, absolutely. And what you said was right. I mean, we need to know these other faiths intimately to be able to, to have some idea of the hurdles that people in those faiths are facing. The good points and the bad points that they're contending with.
Just to sort of steal my own fire, one of the points I'm going to make in, I think probably the 12th talk, is Wilbur's idea of religion having the possibility of being a conveyor belt for all of its believers, from the beige level all the way up through the spectrum of the structures of consciousness. So that's a potential task waiting to happen. There aren't very many religions that are doing that. They tend to decide on a certain level that they want to stay at and encourage everybody to rise to it, but not really to go beyond it, because their view is limited. They don't have the broad perspective that Wilbur is providing with his meta framework. But once you're exposed to that, it's really hard to go back. So you guys are all tainted now. You can't get rid of it. It's there. what you choose to do with it is another story, but. Any last thoughts from anybody? Or shall we shut it down?
I just want to say thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, you're welcome. I enjoy doing this. I hope you pick up on that.
Mark, I do have one quick one when you said any comments.
Yeah.
Do you feel that you need to actually meditate? Because Wilbur went through hours and like months of meditating for 12 hours a day or something, you're saying.
Well, congratulations. You've asked the question that Linda has been telling me somebody's going to ask you that question. Somebody, and here we are in the 50th week or so.
But we don't do it, right?
So
I'm just curious if we're expected to, because if you're going to see things with your own eyes and your own ears, then you should experience Wilbur through your meditation and experience those levels. But I'm not willing to spend that much time. Too old. I need about 20 years. go through what he went.
Well, I'm hardly the the golden boy of meditation. I can count the number of hours on one hand that I've spent formally meditating in my lifetime. But that doesn't mean I don't have my own ways of meditating.
Right.
There are many, many, many ways of meditating. And I think what I'm doing with my study here is a form, my own personal amorphous kind of form of meditation. I wouldn't be able to coach anybody to do it, but I really feel like I have grown, let's see, even over the last 2 years as I've been presenting this material. I feel like my consciousness has expanded quite a bit. I don't know how any of you feel, but
Well, there's a fine line between meditation and contemplation, and I'm exactly like you, Mark. You're contemplative, and you do it in an intellectual way, and that in a spiritual way, and that I believe is a form of meditation.
I hope so. I'd hate to think I'd wasted my entire life.
Well, the faith mentions reflection quite a bit.
Yeah. Well, Abdu'l-Baha mentions meditation by name.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, and he prescribes something different. It's not just going into the void and clearing out your consciousness. And like transcendental meditation, Abdu'l-Baha said that meditation should have the object of discovering the secret to a mystery, something like that. Like the meditation for him seemed to be allied to the rational faculty and problem solving. So you take a problem that's troubled you and you meditate on it until you get a solution.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of the things that Abdu'l-Baha mentioned about the meditative faculty, but Shoghi Effendi's left it open to Baha'is. We don't prescribe any particular form of meditation. That's up to the individual to do that in his or her own way, although it's very clear that Abdu'l-Baha seemed to point meditation in that direction as discovering secrets and mysteries of existence or problem solving in some way.
Mm-hmm.
Jack, this is Mehri.
Yes,
the reason I'm in this country, because more than 45 years I meditate, but the way I like it, with the word of Baha'u'llah, sometime 1 hour and a half.
That's exactly right. That's exactly.
I did a lot, and even I had devotional with the word of Baha'u'llah.
Exactly.
Meditate for 45 minutes, all of us we did. Yes, the reason I'm in this country, because only Baha'u'llah knows how meditate, and I ask him.
And that's prescribed for us, Mary. You're doing exactly what Abdu'l-Baha and Shoghi Effendi and Baha'u'llah asked us to do, was to meditate on the word of God. That's for sure.
Last week until end of this week, just I was meditate with let's deeds, not words.
So you're really looking forward to the end of this course then?
I don't know. The only thing is I'm so upset because I asked from my family, we're supposed to go for vacation end of February. I said, no, March. And now 5th of March, I'm going, but I wish I can listen to your record definitely. But I wish I will be here and listen to all conversation after that. I'm missing that and I'm very sad about that.
Well, where are you going on vacation? Somewhere off planet?
Yes, my older son arranged that we are going to cruise.
Yeah, but you could Zoom from a cruise.
Yes, I try it. That is, I mentioned to him. He said, Mom,
this is important. Come on.
I'm going to do that. I try my best to find off computer and Zoom. They have a computer even in cruise, and I try it to reach you. But I'm not high-tech person.
But he's saying, Mom, you have to take a holiday from all that stuff.
I think so. I think so. But I believe meditation. I believe so much.
Yeah.
Okay, we've got one last person to comment, and then we're going to close it down. Bill, what are you thinking from way down south?
I was just like, we're talking about consciousness, and when I look at everybody that's here and the overall level of consciousness, and not that I'm in a good position to judge, but I'm quite pleased with it, and I look forward to just enjoying it sometimes and not saying anything. But I think when we get back to the deeds, not words, which is a trigger thing for me. The fact is that if we enjoy all this consciousness, and it's our jobs to help others to raise their consciousness, and we can call that teaching, but it's more generic than teaching the Baha'i faith. Although teaching the Baha'i faith naturally is an effort to help to raise the consciousness of others. And like what you're doing, Mark, is like the epitome of what a person can do to raise, to work to help raise the consciousness of others. There's so much inertia and disincentive for consciousness to be raised, to go to these different levels, that without this active effort by those who have achieved higher levels of consciousness, even only a little bit higher, is to turn around and try to bring someone else up to that healthy hierarchical level, is, I think, a deed and not a word. So discourse that inspires action is as good as action, or better. So when we say deeds, not words, we need to realize that discourse, like such as Mark is doing, and everybody else who contributes with their comments is doing, is if it inspires people toward raising their consciousness, then that's a deed. And if that raised consciousness is inspired toward physical into engaged action in the progress, or to mitigate the struggling of humanity, then that's deeds inspired by consciousness, which is inspired by this kind of discourse.
Wow.
That's a great comment. And what I like, Bill, about the consciousness raising that Mark is doing is that it's connected with unity, because we connect with one another at a higher level when we discuss these things among ourselves. To me, that's the great value of it, is that when we strive to understand strive to understand the things of God, the transcendental things, the imponderable things. We create connections between ourselves at a higher level of unity. And to me, that's a very beautiful thing.
Oh, oh, excellent.
It's all good. Everybody take a deep sigh and disappear.
Say goodnight. Okay, guys, you've stayed long time tonight.
Keep the love, keep the love. I love you all. I want you to
We'll be
know.
back in 2 weeks,
Yes.
and I'll be a cleaned up man by then.